about you, but when my kids were little, we had a preschool for them where they're like, they'd go for 3 or 4 hours. It was nothing special, you know. It was but it was a big deal when they're that age, when they're little, because they loved being with friends. They loved all the little carts in the back and the climbing structures and all this, and the balls and the clays and the paints and all that sort of stuff. And whenever I would go to pick up my little one, all the other little kids would, whatever they were doing, as a room, it was sort of like a culture of the room. They would say, "Hi, Mr. Callett," right? So you'd have a bunch of little 4 or 5-year-olds going, "Hi, Mr. Callett." I'd be like, "Oh, hi, everybody. Just picking up my buddy here." And then, but this was the amazing thing. So because they were in the potty training stage, they had 3 tiny little toilets. I mean, they were the tiniest little toilets, Brad. They were so cute. And so you would, as a parent, when you had to drop off, part of the thing was you had to take them, do a quick potty training, and then teach them how to wash hands. Because obviously the teachers don't want to get left with like 30 kids that all of a sudden have to go to the bathroom.
All of whom have to go.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I go to pick up my little one time, and I walk in. He's not in the playroom. He's not in the back room or the backyard where they all have the bikes and the climbing structures. So I go check in the bathroom, and there, sure enough, he's sitting there. But the other kids are sitting there, and so this is what I'm greeted with. "Hi, Mr. Gallant!"
Oh my God.
It killed me from 1,000 comedy angles. It killed me. "Hi, Mr. Gallant!" Just a bunch of voices, a bunch of tiny little voices, all straining like, "Hi, Mr. Gallant!"
Oh my God. And the beautiful thing about it is it's so pure. Like it's just an honest to goodness being a person moment.
Yeah, there was no self-consciousness because obviously they can't. The teachers have to be able to see them, so there's no walls, there's no stalls, there's no thing. It's just like 3 cute little toilets, 4 little. Actually, no, it's 4 toilets right next to each other, and it's just amazing to walk in to 4 sweet little voices, totally sincere. "Hi, Mr. Gallant!" And on that note, I'm going to say, hi, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Kiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave,
oh God,
let's talk comics.
Now one of us is gonna bust an artery doing that straining.
Yeah, we're gonna have.
Well, Brad, just a reminder: this show is going out live to our friends and compatriots over at patreon.com/ComicLab, and at the Live Gab level, you can watch the show being recorded live every week on the Live Gab live stream, and those shows are archived every week, and so you can join us over at the $10 level at patreon.com/ComicLab.
And we'd like to take a moment to thank our longtime sponsor, Wacom, over at WACOM.com. They're the makers of the professional, portable, powerful Wacom One.
Amen. And you know what? One thing that I have both the Cintiq Pro that I use on a day-to-day basis, and I have the Wacom One. One nice thing about the Wacom One that we haven't really mentioned before is that it really allows for lap sketching and drawing, which is not something that a traditional desk allows for. But we all grew up with a notepad and a pen that in school or on a bench or waiting for the bus or whatever, we would sketch on our lap. And the Wacom One is fantastic for a very different style of casual sketching that can go anywhere, do anything, and be with you comfy on the couch kind of a style. And so for that, I really appreciate the Wacom One. It's been great for me for that.
Absolutely. And as I tell people all the time, if you're thinking about dipping a toe into digital art, sometimes you look around at some of these pieces of equipment and the price point is a little bit scary.
Yes.
It's more than you want to put into something that you're not sure you're going to like or you're not going to take with. I'm telling you that Wacom One is at the perfect price point that you can take a risk. And by the way, spoiler alert, you're going to love it. Trust me on that. You're going to love it. But it's at the price point where you can justify making that step.
Absolutely. So we give a huge shout out and a thanks to our friends over at Wacom at WACOM.com, makers of the Wacom One. And Brad, our first question for today comes in from Alexi. Alexi over at patreon.com/ComicLab writes, I have recently realized being on my phone makes me crazy a little, especially on social media. It becomes a huge distraction and a way to waste time, especially right now where times are bleak and scary. You tend to to even invent distractions so you don't have to deal with difficult things. Like when Dave bought that gigantic bag of dog food and lied to us that the pandemic would be over once he finished that bag of dog food. Well, guess what, Dave? It didn't work. Anyway, how do you guys deal with distractions now? Have you both just doubled down on your comics and podcasts because you're in a way trying to distract yourselves? How do you check in with yourselves to make sure that social media and the phone is not the distraction? Thank you. Thank you. All right, Alexi, Brad, what answer do you got for Alexi's question there, my friend?
Well, let's take the last part first.
Yes.
How do we make sure that we're not distracting ourselves by doing comics and podcasts? Well, in our cases, Alexi, anything that distracts me from the comic is a distraction. The comic isn't a distraction.
Oh, wow. Yeah, good point. Good. Yeah.
Is my livelihood, right? The podcast is part of my livelihood. This is part of what I do for a living.
Right.
Those things are not distractions. Anything that keeps me from doing those things is a distraction. And we're gonna. That goes back to priorities, which I think we're going to talk about a lot through the course of this topic, and maybe even some more that we might get to today. Setting priorities for yourself is a big part of that, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny because the best use of social media and the phone is a tool towards the goal of your cartooning and your career and your art process and all that sort of stuff. But absolutely, I will say on a very human level, I fail all the time at social media. I'll look up and be like, what, 30 minutes, where'd that go? Or what a waste of time. Or I'm not a net better person having been on social media than I was when I sat down with this coffee to start, just scroll for a bit. And so it is worth admitting that all of us find it to be a waste of time, but in the sense also that right now we kind of need what we need for pleasant waste of time to distract us from the sort of, burning shit show that the world is at the moment.
Yeah.
So I will say two things. One is be kind to yourself because you are not alone. I waste time, Brad wastes time, everybody wastes time on their phone. It is a natural thing. It is a device literally that everyone involved, both at Apple and Google, that leaves the company later admits, oh yeah, we had whole meetings about how to get people to up their usage and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not so much at Apple, but at social media companies, absolutely. And so admittedly, every bit of this software is meant to trigger the same sort of casino effect of keep pulling that lever, sort of get the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
So you're not alone in that, but and be kind to yourself that happens. But when you find that it is dominating your life in a way that you are actively finding not just a lack of enjoyment, but pain from, sadness from, that you're like, oh, God damn it, I'm wasting time. Oh, I'm wasting my life. Or, I'm not a better person. That's when you have to do strategies like plugging it in outside of your bedroom at night or on the far side of your room at night. So it's not the last thing and the first thing that you reach for during the day. It's also when you try to start scheduling time with your phone or away from your phone, or installing software on your phone that limits or halts your ability to access the internet or have anything other than emergency phone calls coming in. There's a bajillion apps that will let you do that. There are strategies that you need to start implementing when you're at the stage that it sounds you're in, which is to actively hate your phone.
Right. And that's where I'm going to take Dave's advice and go one step further.
Okay.
Alexi was, if you remember, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast, a few months ago, we told Alexi, you got to hit that button. Remember that?
Right.
And during that conversation, Alexi we were saying, hey, you haven't started publishing a comic yet. And we were encouraging him, not demanding, but encouraging him to start publishing his comic. Right. Because he was still in the I'm thinking about it stages, but he hadn't started publishing yet. And I checked in with Alexi before we did this show, and I said, hey, have you started publishing yet? He says, no, I still haven't got to that point yet. That's fine. That's fine. But since you haven't started publishing a comic, my advice to you, Alexi, is going to be exactly the same. Alexi, I want you to hit that button. Not the publish button in this particular case, but because you haven't started publishing, I want you to hit the off button. I want you to turn that completely off. I want you to take Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, take them right off your phone. I want you to plug that phone in on the other side of the bedroom so you're not checking it in the middle of the night. I want you to turn it off because there's no reason for you to be on social media. And I mean that totally. Let me ask you this, David.
Yes.
If you were not publishing a comic, would you be on Twitter right now?
Oh, wow. What a good question. Wow.
Take Sheldon out, take Drive out, take Kickstarter, Patreon. You're not doing any of that. Is there any reason at all that you would turn on Twitter?
I'm genuinely taken aback because I don't know. I don't think I would be, Brad. I mean, I might at this point, there would be a lingering entertainment value, but frankly, oh my God, think about how many more books I would read at night if I didn't have social media on my phone.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes
think about how happy you'd be.
Yeah, sometimes in interacting, I will say this, sometimes in interacting with Watterson, I would get glimpses of like, oh no, it's so nice to not have to deal with any of that bullshit, to just take it out of your life completely. And I am frankly not brave enough to delete it now because I feel like I need it for work. But I wish I had an ability to, I mean, really the smart thing would be to just unfollow everyone that I follow.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, it's this weird, it is a casino-like thing of like, one link that I got from Twitter 4 years ago helped my career. And therefore my brain has this weird dopamine association of like, nope, someday it's going to pay off, that you're going to get something valuable for either income, creativity, inspiration from Twitter. And that happens every once in a blue moon. But you're right that I don't know that I would need it on a day-to-day basis if I wasn't cartooning.
I guarantee you that if I wasn't doing comics, all that stuff would be off my phone. And to a certain degree, I proved it to myself. You know that whole thing, plugging your phone in on the other side of the bedroom? Mm-hmm. I started doing that about a week ago. I've been sleeping like a baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you?
You know, when you get up to go to the bathroom at 3 o'clock, I would come back. And of course, I don't fall right back asleep. So I sit there and I go, well, I'm not doing anything else. Might as well see what's going on Twitter. Oh, Twitter, full of people complaining about their lives and upset about this and upset about that in politics. Well, maybe I'll look on Facebook. Oh, boy, I've got some real humdingers for relatives.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll look on Instagram. Oh, nothing there either. And then an hour and a half has gone by and I haven't fallen back asleep. I plug that thing over on the other side. By the way, it'll make your alarm on your phone into a real alarm because now you got to get out of bed and go turn that freaking thing off.
As soon as your feet hit that cold floor, you're like, damn it, all right, now I'm awake.
It's like, I'm up now.
Yeah.
So I proved it to myself. I guarantee you that if I wasn't doing a comic, I would have divested myself of all social media because there's very little joy there. Very little joy there.
Yeah.
And I would have gotten rid of it. Now, here's the thing. I don't know this for a fact. Alexi, this may be untrue about you, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because I know that this sentiment is out there. So tell me if this sounds familiar. Even though I'm not doing a comic now, I've got to start building my social media audience so that when I do release my comic, I'll have the audience already there in place. Let's talk about that concept, Dave. The concept of I'm not publishing yet, but I'm building my audience now.
It's sort of it's kind of like my attitude when I'm about to go on a diet, which is to gain to lose. Like I'm going to eat this pie because it'll be easier to lose weight later on if I gain an extra 5. No, here's the thing. Here's why that metaphor falls apart in terms of I need to start building my social media following now so that when I launch my cartoon, there's an audience already there. Imagine you're going to open a restaurant. And you're like, the people need to know that I'm going to have delicious food served in a wonderful, delightful environment. I'm going to start talking about car parts on my social media. That's what I'm going to do. And here's the connection, because the comics aren't there yet. There is nothing that they are eventually going to stick around for. So what they're going to get from you on social media is comments about the food or your job or the people in your life or insights about pop culture. But none of that is the comic itself that you're eventually going to want them to follow. So you're going to gain a weird audience that then is not going to follow the comics that eventually start appearing on the social media. It doesn't work. It's like the restaurateur talking about car parts when they're eventually going to be serving food.
Yeah, it is possible. Not probable in some cases, but it is possible to build the wrong audience. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
You can build. There's many cases where people love the comic and they don't like the creator so much. Right?
Well,
we tell
having met a lot of cartoonists, I feel that very much. I like their comic, don't like them so much.
Don't like the person.
Yeah.
And the more now we tell you that under the 4 C's that some of the things you should be doing is sharing your own personal thoughts to the degree that you're comfortable with. But it is possible that your personal thoughts and your comics don't line up quite so much. So not only am I going to tell you that it's possible in doing what we're talking about right now to build the wrong audience, I'm going to tell you I've done it. I've built the wrong audience.
Okay, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Let's go back a few months. I was telling you about TikTok, right? I was so excited
Brad
about
Geiger
TikTok.
thirst trap videos. Yes.
Yes. So I was doing a lot of videos that I was talking about creativity and motivation and some education.
Right.
And it was me standing right here in my studio, looking in the camera saying, you can do it. Let's talk about this and let's talk about that. So it was getting a really good audience.
Okay.
People were really taking to it. And listen, looking at this face,
how could
who
it not?
wouldn't love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So around October, I wanted to take a little break from that. And I was looking at what people posting comics on TikTok were doing successfully, looking at what was getting good engagement.
Okay.
And I started stealing some of those techniques. I had a whole bunch of single panel comics for Halloween. And I thought, I will add a little video to that, add some sound. I'll have I'll either narrate the punchline or I'll have the auto caption reader read the text. Did all these things based on what I've seen other people doing and getting good engagement. Every time, David, I got to tell you, every time I posted a cartoon, I lost readers. And I mean, I lost a lot of readers. Or not readers, but viewers. You understand. I lost followers every time. And I did it because TikTok has been an experiment. I felt free to screw around with it. So all through October, I charted how at every time. Literally, if I'd post a video, it'd go back up. About me, great. Talking about Patreon, wonderful. A cartoon, right down into the toilet, right? I'd lose followers every time I posted something that wasn't me talking motivation into the camera. Right. I had built the wrong audience for that. Right. So that's where I'm telling you this whole idea of I need to build my audience now for the comic that I'm going to publish later. It's not 100%. In a lot of cases, those two things do line up.
There will be overlap, but
it's very possible to build the wrong audience.
Well, and while you're doing that, while you're potentially building an audience, let's say even you're building let's give you credit that every reader that you build, you'll retain when the comics, and they're going to be so happy that's coming. Yeah. What would be a better use of time? Building that audience that's going to be small to middling because it's just you commenting on social media, or actively taking that time to practice and to work on and hone your craft. Yes. The latter is the better one, because if it's really good when it hits social media, you can't hide talent online. You're going to find an audience if it's really good stuff, no matter what you do. Even if you're terrible at social media, even if you're ham-handed about it, you're going to find an audience with a good comic. So the better thing, and this is true for all of us, myself included, is to get off social media and to work on our craft. Harder to do than it sounds, but especially hopefully a little bit easier when you don't yet have a comic to put on social media, because frankly, just uninstall social media. It's really easy when you don't need to do it. Just uninstall it for don't cancel the account, leave the account going. You might retain whatever you've gotten, but just uninstall from your phone and work on your cartooning until you're ready to launch.
This is another one of those live your luxury moments, because really, I'm telling you, if you are not publishing a comic yet, you have the luxury of not doing social media. Once you start doing that comic, I guarantee you, like Dave just got done saying, if it's good, it's going to generate an audience. Now, let's not be unrealistic. It's going to take you a little while. All good things take a little time. It's going to take you a little while to build that up and to build that readership by posting good work over and over and over again. Of course it is. But you are going to get there. And it's not going to be necessarily any faster with this audience you think you're building. you will gain an audience by posting good work. In the meantime, live your luxury. I'm telling you, do it right now. Hit that Twitter, delete it from your phone, delete Facebook, delete Instagram. You don't need any of them. And if they're making your life miserable, why are they there? You're an adult. You have control over your life.
Well,
lose them.
Yeah. Listen, why are M&Ms in my pantry? We all have our sins, but
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
The thing is, though, is that we can tell from reading your question, Alexi, that you're using words like disappointed or crazy, or it makes me mad, or I'm less happy, that kind of thing, and so this is the time to step away from it, work on the craft, honest to God. And I'm not just being bleak or not just being flippant about it. Read comics instead of reading social media. It'll get you a better editorial eye if you read good graphic novels, if you read good comics, read novels. It's such a better use of time than social media. And I say that as someone who consistently checks out 10 books from the library and they sit on my bedstand while I'm reading Twitter. So know that I'm myself being a hypocrite, but it is the better route to go. I
would even say, just to put a hat on a hat there, read good comics and read bad comics. Read comics that are being made at the pro-am or lower level, because what's going to happen, you're going to start to see things that are done incorrectly, things that were done poorly, and you're going to start to learn to see them in your own work too. Word balloons that don't line up right. And lettering that doesn't work, and page design and concepts that don't, the punchlines that don't land. Don't just read good stuff. It's wonderful to read good stuff, but it's so polished, you miss all of the why that went into the what. Whereas if you read bad comics, and there's lots of them out there,
I invite you to read the first 10 years of Sheldon,
and then the first 10 years of Greystone Inn is right behind it. I'm a big fan of reading stuff that and calling them bad is not exactly accurate. They're on their place in their journey, just like I was, just like Dave was. They're not there yet, but I'm being serious about it. Read stuff that isn't there yet. You'll start to see stuff that you'll be able to put into work in your own comics. I got to tell you, the supportive dad, and you came out because you turned into Susan McTaggart there. You know what? I'm not going to say they're bad. Friends, these are comics that are on their journey. They're seeds that have not yet flowered into the full flower bed that they're going to become, friends. So let's not say they're bad comics. They're on their journey. I'm Susan McTaggart. Look for my new book, Comics That'll Improve You While They Improve Themselves. All right, so Brad, let's move on to our next question, because we've talked about stepping away from social media when it's making you unhappy, when it's making you crazy, when it's making you less feeling good about yourself. And let's jump into starting. So Alan Gladfelter writes in over at patreon.com/ComicLab. When I put my very first comic on the web, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Patreon, on Instagram, on my own website, how do I get anybody to notice it in the first place? Not how do I get people coming back or spreading the word, but how do I get anybody to be the first to put eyes on it? On the day I finally push that button after I tell my mom, who do I tell that it exists? Brad Geiger, I turn to you. How does one start at the very beginning? Who do you turn to and tell? Yeah, this is wonderful. It's another one of those push the button. We've got a push the button theme on this show. This is beautiful. So let's talk about that. Alan. One thing that we've said a million times on this show, probably so often that you're tired of hearing it, is that this Dave thing is that handsome. We do. Well, yes, almost as many times as we've said that. It's almost like a spoken and unspoken credo of the show. We say it all the time. That's Dave is handsome. Dave is handsome. Yep, there we go. Along those same lines, another thing that we say is it's not a marathon, it's a sprint. Right. Now, stop for just a moment. Of those two, picture those two types of runners in your mind. One of those runners is very, very conscientious about their first step. It's the sprinter. They've even got special blocks that they put their feet into so that they can make sure when that starter pistol goes off, that first step is optimized, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're only going to be taking maybe 1,000 footfalls, and they've got to make sure that that first one is amazing. Who's not considered? Who's not worried about their first step? It's the marathon runner. because they're going to take 10,000 footfalls for the next
ungodly
2
hours. Yeah.
And this one right now doesn't matter because there's going to be 10,000 after this one. The marathon runner is not worried about his or her or their first step.
You know what's funny about a marathon runner? The posture. I love watching the sort of starter gun of a marathon because, first of all, everybody's like the people that are 20 people back, they're like, they don't get to start at the same time. They're like, I'll just wait a minute until everyone's out of the way. But the body posture is always like a teenager that's been asked to take out the trash. Like a marathon runner starts with a little bit of a slump. The arms are kind of like, the head is tilted to the side. Like, oh, Dad, Mom, why? All right, I'll take the trash out. And then they kind of shuffle to start, you know. It's so funny how like the little ambling start versus that super sprint off the line. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But to build off of Brad's thought, we are all of us are marathoners, not sprinter in this.
It's being pointed out in the live stream that I said it backwards. I said it's not a marathon, it's a sprint. So I'll correct that really quick.
I didn't even notice it. That's amazing.
Yes. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Did you say it's a sprint, not a marathon? And neither one of us?
They're telling me in the live stream that I got it backwards, and they're very good in that live stream. So I assume that and by the way, it's not a great leap of faith to understand that I probably said it wrong.
I like that both of us. Brad's like, well, when it shines, it rains, and we're like, yep, that sounds right. I'm pretty sure that's a saying. Yep.
Don't stop him. He's on a roll.
Yeah.
So Alan, it's not about the first post. Mm-hmm. And if you're spending a whole lot of time worried about your first post, you've got your priorities all wrong. It's not about that first post. It's about the 10,000 you're going to make over the next several years. That's what it's all about. And by the way, I get it. I totally understand.
Yeah, I do too.
Wanting to make a big splash with that first one. But I got to talk you out of that mindset immediately because you're going to be disappointed. Yeah. Inevitably, you're going to be disappointed.
So, in fact, Alan, I'm going to build off of Brad's great advice there, but I'm going to give you two practical bits of advice on actually who you tell and when you tell them. Now, your impulse, because the first comic took you 1, 2, 3, 4 hours to make, you're going to be like, that's a lot of work. I want to tell people right away. You may want to hold off until you have an archive of 15, 20, 30 comics up there. And I'll tell you why. We as cartoonists pour hours into these things. People read them in a hot second, right? We always forget that the average reader powers through it so much. And so the odds of them finding a comic that they like, that they spark on, that they respond to and say, yes, I will go back and look at Alan's comics again, is far more likely if there's 15 in the archives than if there's one. Because we've all had some comic that we've done, we're like, this is great, I'm really proud of it. For whatever reason, 40% of the people that read it don't spark with it. 60% of the people don't spark with it. The people that spark love it, but that's not enough. Anyway, what I'm getting at is you're far likely to have better success when you have a smallish archive of 10, 15, 20, 30 comics, and then you really make your big push, right? So that takes a little bit of the pressure off of that first step, doesn't it? Now, the second one is, why not? Tell everybody you know. Tell your friends in your life. Tell your loved ones. Tell coworkers that are not your manager because they always get suspicious when you're doing things on the side. And tell old schoolmates that loved comics. Tell people from high school and college, wherever you want. Old sports friends, people that you meet at whatever bar you might go to. You can let people know. It is not a problem. But to Brad's point, it's going to be it's not always an exponential growth curve, but it's not unlike an exponential growth curve in that the first X number of years or days of that exponential curve, it looks like nothing is happening, right? And then slowly but surely, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, and you'll start to see a pickup in how many people are reading the comics. But know that also is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah. And I'll add one thing to what Dave offered in terms of positive encouragement. And that's one of the comics commandments. Every day, somebody's going to be reading your comic for the first time.
Yes.
There's got to be something in that moment that keeps them. So that means that if you're really concerned with building an audience, you cannot have pages or social media updates in which nothing happens. You can't have a whole page where the only thing happens is a train goes down the tracks and then it's an illustration of trees. right? You can't have nothing happening if you expect to build an audience. Something's got to and by the way, I would place this way above priority in how do I make my first post. Your bigger challenge is how do I make every post significant so that something happens on that day, because you're not going to audience build on day 1. You might be doing your biggest audience building on day 12. Right. When you have something that really hits with people and the zeitgeist is right and everything lines up, your big audience building days are going to come at complete random. Right. Your comic has to be ready for it.
Absolutely. And this is a bit of a parallel, but I think there's a connection here, is that a lot of people would say to Brad and I, well, it's easy for you guys to talk about this. You launched 20, 25 years ago when the web was smaller, when it was easier. Yeah. And there is a quiet lie to that in this sense.
It's more than quiet.
Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of my career. If I produce truly stellar comics, it will go viral. My audience will grow. It will get bigger. What I'm getting at is I can take whatever level I've had, but get infinitely better tomorrow and have a bigger audience. It can be a brand new start is another way of saying it for me tomorrow. And so it doesn't matter if I started 20 years ago, 25 years ago. If I also get worse, my audience is going to get smaller, right? There's no necessary advantage to having started 20 years ago, 25 years ago. If I'm producing crap, I'll lose my audience really quick. And so, don't tell yourself like, oh, I wish I'd started 20, 25 years ago. I will remind you and remind everyone there were some infinitely trickier barriers to overcome 20, 25 years ago in terms of reaching people online that don't exist now. It's just easier. There's a lot of grease. A lot of wheels have been greased. And there's a little bit of what's the survivorship?
Survivor bias.
Bias on our parts as survivors. That like, oh, it was easier back then. It wasn't. I can remember hundreds of comics that started 20, 25 years ago that failed just as much as comics could fail today. It's just as easy to fail and to succeed today as it was back then. So don't listen to the survivorship bias. It's very doable now.
Every now and again, you'll see that pop up on Twitter. How do you succeed at webcomics? Well, step 1, you start 15 years ago, right? Which always ticks me off because it puts all the emphasis on starting 15 years ago. It says nothing about the 5,475 days between 15 years ago and today. Each one of them required an awful lot of hard work.
Right.
That's step 1, is that it totally discounts 5,475 days of work. It's just they're focused on that one day 15 years ago. Well, there was a bunch of days in between, pal. And number 2, like Dave said, 15 years ago, there was no social media. You had to hope somebody found you online. Our readers were foragers instead of being force-fed content. There were foragers. It was impossible in many cases to get across. And also stop and check your viewpoint just for a second. When you say the only way to succeed is to start 15 years ago, that completely discounts everything that's happened on Webtoons, which has been huge for web comics. Take a look at Rachel Smythe's comic from Webtoons that's being developed into a Netflix series. Take a look at all of the success that's happened there, and you're completely discounting that as if it doesn't exist. I'm going to be honest with you, without putting any syrup on it. Saying that the only way to succeed in webcomics is to start 15 years ago is dumb. It makes you sound dumb. And you shouldn't say it. It's just not true. There's a whole lot more that goes into that. And if you're thinking about starting webcomics today, you should not be confounded by somebody that says that it's only possible to start 15 years ago.
Right. And while Brad's voice devolves into a grandfather, I will jump in to say it's also worthwhile to not conflate or to confuse the fact that I've been working my 10,000 hours in those 15 years from the fact that I started 15 years ago. Those are two very different things. Of course, Brad and I are better cartoonists than we were 20, 25 years ago when we started. Of course we are. We draw every day. I can't get worse at something that I do every day, to Brad's point, as he always says. And I've just gotten better on an intuitive level of knowing what a comic needs or doesn't need, what line art needs or doesn't need. And so, yes, of course we are better than when we started, but don't conflate that with the fact that we started 15, 20, 25 years ago. That's not the same thing. It is,
Right.
you have just as much opportunity starting today as you did back then. And all it takes is the hard work and stick-to-itiveness. And Alan, I think you're going to be great. Of course, you're anxious about starting. Starting is always an anxiety-prone thing. And as much as Brad and I are being very confident about it, anytime Brad and I start a new project, there's anxiety. So don't feel like you're alone on that.
No.
But I think if you take in aggregate what we've been saying about the fact that it is a marathon, it's not a sprint, the first step, even if you mess it up, Alan, by the way, this is what you should hear. Even if you mess it up, it's still recoverable. Still recoverable. Yes. I don't love the first 10, 20, 30 Sheldons, but who cares? I recovered from it, made a whole career out of it. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know, so you can recover from even a mistake. You're going to be fine. It is a marathon, not a sprint. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. All right, Brad, well, in Muppet style, I'm going to move us right along. And here is our next question coming over at patreon.com/ComicLab. The question is, since comics are very much a visual medium of storytelling, what about comics without words or dialogue? Oh, that's a good one, Brad, because I don't know that we've ever talked about wordless comics. Have we in 4 years of ComicLab? I forgot the name of the show for a minute.
No.
What, have we ever talked about wordless comics?
I don't know that we've ever had a need to.
I know that they're your favorite, Brad. Wordless comics are your favorite.
I hate wordless comics with a white hot passion.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say that.
My God. Everybody, it's so...
First of all, I should give the caveat because I also share this feeling. Our subjective opinion of wordless comics does not necessarily equate to their own innate value. This is just our subjective opinion about wordless comics.
Subjective. Listen, Dave, think of all those wildly successful, amazing wordless comics. Like, for example...
Oh, that's a deep cut, Brad. That's a deep cut. Well, no, let's think about what there's Henry with the weird bald kid.
Oh my God, I've got a Henry collection right back there.
No, you don't. Do you have a Henry?
I don't, because it's horrible. Who would buy that? Does it even exist?
More recently, Tatuli had Leo. That one had a good...
now we got I don't want to call out Mark Tatuli because he's a very, very good cartoonist. But every time, does this bother you? Maybe it's just me. Every time there's a sign with a word in it, like the whole thing it's got no words, but then there'll be like a stop sign. Well, that's a word. STOP is on the sign, or there'll be a theater and it says theater across it. Well, that's a word. It's like there's sneaky little ways that you still put words in, and as a result, he's bending over backwards when all it would really take is to put some words in a word balloon, and you go, what? Why? Just why not? I don't know why that bothers me, but it does. There's words there.
That's a hill you're going to die on, by God. Yeah. That's not a wordless comic. I saw the word lemonade in the background. So for me, wordless comics, they work for a very specific age, and it's usually, or it's one of two things. They always seem to do well in a European comics environment where you travel 100 miles in any given direction and it's a totally new language. And so if you're trying to sell to a broader audience, you go wordless, right? So there's that. There's option A. Option B is you're writing comics for either newly literate, semi-literate, or not yet literate kids who want to enjoy comics, know they like comics, but they're not yet reading at a level that would get them into Dog Man or something like that. So you do a wordless comic. But unfortunately for most adults, a wordless comic is an unsatisfying experience because without words, you get none of the nuance of human experience. So you end up with either a slapstick or a sight gag or some visual fall, like it's a banana peel joke of somebody's falling on a banana peel, because you can't do War and Peace as a wordless comic. You know what I mean? You can't go, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. There's no way to do any of that with a wordless comic. So you're left with somebody gets hit with a baseball bat.
Yeah. And what I perceive happens, I'll share with me my own personal bias a little bit, because in one of my classes, one of the things I assign at the end of the semester is you have the option of making a comic. And I always say to my students, don't try to do a wordless comic, because they've been told, I'm sure, by somebody that wordless comics can be really wonderful and you can do a vast amount of storytelling.
Right.
But what I perceive is their thought is, well, hey, this would be a lot easier if I didn't have to write any words. Because think about, let's face it, comics success is very much about the words. It's the writing. What do we say on the show all the time? It's all about the writing. And so some people think, and this is my perception, they go, well, geez, if I took the words out, this whole thing would be so much easier. The problem is, once you take the words out, it becomes 10 times more difficult to actually do a good comic without words. In fact, I'm telling you, without hesitation, I think very much of my skills as a cartoonist. I have a very high opinion of myself. That should come as a surprise to nobody. I would not attempt to do a wordless comic on my life, because I know it's way beyond my capacity as a visual storyteller.
Now, Brad says that, but I'm going to correct him real quick, knowing as a friend that he has on occasion done a wordless comic, because it's a tool in your toolbox. But I think what you're saying, Brad, is don't set yourself up for years of having to produce a wordless comic. It's just hard to do. It's unsatisfying, I think. And it both from a creative standpoint and a reader standpoint, I think it ultimately becomes unsatisfying. But Brad, both you and I know this to be the case. We have eventually done a comic or two that are wordless. I know we have done that because it is a tool in the cartoonist toolkit. I just think you don't want to go down the path of having to commit to that for the next 5 years of your life. It's really unsatisfying, I think.
Yeah. There are moments that it's appropriate, but but if I were to try to, like you were talking about, Henry, if I were to try to do that on a daily basis, it would fall apart so quickly. Because let's face it, there's a reason we use words for communication. They're very good for that purpose.
they do a good job. The pretty words are real good at communicating how we're feeling.
There's a reason we have words. There's a reason that over 100 years we've developed all kinds of ways to make those words happen in a comic, whether it's a word balloon, a thought balloon, a sound effect, any other number of things. There's a reason that comics is a melding of words and images. Trying to purposefully avoid that, unless, like Dave says, every once in a while, if the comic, if the best presentation of that one moment is wordless, fine. But to actually set out to do a wordless comic a long term, oh man, I think you're giving up so much storytelling potential in doing that. And that's my own personal opinion.
Well, yeah. So to expand on this a little bit, what are the things that comics melds together to make them such a superpower medium? Yeah. They take words, they take images, they take clear iconography, which is not necessarily images. It's a little bit separate, like stars around a thing, wiggly lines, that kind of thing. Sequentiality, and probably more stuff I could rattle off real quick. But with any one, you can focus on a comic that has no images. It's just words and sequentiality, right? Yep. And then you get that Alpha Flight that John Byrne did that one time where they're fighting in a snowstorm, right? It's like that old joke of a cow eating vanilla ice cream in a snowstorm. There was an Alpha Flight that had no pictures in it. It was just words and sequentiality. So yes, you can do that. Would it get old to do that all the time? Absolutely. It got old a little bit by the end of that Alpha Flight.
Yes, it did.
But so can you take the words out of comics? Absolutely, you can do that. That's part of the toolkit. Would you want to do that all the time? I don't know.
No.
Can you take the iconography out of comics? Yes, you can. Would you want to do it all the time? No, not all the time. What I'm getting at is it's kind of, there's all of those tools and all those bits of comics as a toolkit, you can focus on or take them out of the process. Absolutely. But it gets less satisfying and it's a harder road to hoe if you limit yourself in that regard, don't you think, Brad? Isn't that a good way to say it?
You're setting yourself up for so much more work. And again, my perception is that, at least with my students, I think they're thinking it's going to be easier. Well, I don't have to do any words. I'll just do pictures and I'll draw out this sequence. And the truth of the matter is, you're making it way more harder than it should be. If you just put some words up there. Give us a little hint. What's going on?
Hey, what's that character thinking as they fall on that banana peel? It's a little bit like I not to throw another form of comics under the bus, but I think one of the reasons why I find fumetti unsatisfying a lot of times. If you know fumetti is It got started in Italy and another place. I don't remember. It was New York, I think, also had it at the same time. But it's basically photo comics, is sequentially represented photos that also have word balloons and voice bubbles and thought balloons and that kind of stuff, right? But my problem with fumetti is the creator tends to be pretty good. They understand sequentiality. They understand the staging of photos. They always seem to get actors that look like they're in, if you ever seen, Brad, a 1920s stage play of someone doing Shakespeare, remember how they were a little bit more, the arm was up and I'm speaking because it's 1920 and I'm doing Shakespeare and the arm. That's what fumetti always looks like. Like the exaggeration that comics use so well, to me, ends up looking dopey in fumetti. It's like, oh, this is very posed. This moment is not at all naturalistic. It's very much like, I am posing for my fumetti with this spoon in my hand. And you're like, all right, I see what's going on. I know. So for whatever reason, I feel about fumetti the way I feel about wordless comics, which is it takes aspects of comics toolkits and uses them in a way that would be fun once or twice, but gets old real quick, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's that Harold Zoid school of comics acting that we talked about before. It's that. Yeah, I don't think that's. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's kind of a poor pairing. So yeah, I that's 2 thumbs down for wordless comics over here.
And once again, you're listening to 2 guys with opinions. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, and by the way, if your opinion is different, and if you go out there and prove us wrong by doing this amazing comic that's wordless, you will find 2 guys. And if you really truly do a great job, you'll find no 2 guys that's going to be happier for you, that's going to be cheering you on louder than Dave and I, if you go out and make this amazing thing. So if you take that as a challenge, then wonderful. Let us know how it goes, because we would be thrilled to see something that really worked like that. My guess is that it's going to be harder than you think, but prove us wrong. We'll be thrilled.
Absolutely.
So Dave, let's go on to the next question. This comes in from our Patreon backer, Emily Gunnell, who says, "Hello, Dad and Brave. I've written myself into quite a pickle. I'm nearly done writing season 1 of my first webcomic. Congratulations, Emily. And I'm just now realizing that it's unclear who the main protagonist is." That is quite a pickle. The story bounces back and forth between the perspective of 2 characters and spends almost an equal amount of time on both of them. Is it possible to have a story with 2 protagonists instead of 1? What actually makes a protagonist instead of a character in the main cast? And am I overthinking this? Thank you for making such a wonderful and informative show. I'm happy to be finally joining you guys on Patreon for the first time. So Emily, 2 protagonists. That sounds like quite a handful storytelling wise. We're going to give you some thoughts on handling it.
Absolutely. So, first of all, just to get it right out of the way, absolutely, you can have 2 protagonists. It does, in some respects, make it a little trickier, but it is not impossible. There are many long-form stories, short-form stories, movies that have co-protagonists or dual protagonists. Usually, what's done is they are 2 distinct, disparate, different people that have the same goal. That usually tends to be the best way to write co-protagonists or dual protagonists, because just from a storytelling perspective, they're chasing the same rainbow. You know, they're sort of going after the same thing. So in some respects, Fozzie and Kermit are co-protagonists of the Muppet movie, right? And they're moving right along together, trying to break into Hollywood. It's the shared dream, even though Kermit is really the protagonist, but it's, you know, they're co-protagonists. You could say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of other stories, Shawshank Redemption, that really is both a story about friendship and about male love, but it's about these two guys trying to figure out how to get out of the prison and find the life of their dream, and also find that they live a life worthwhile amongst terrible situations. I would consider those two to be co-protagonists, even though Andy is often presented more as the protagonist. And so it's also true, Brad, you could probably speak to this better. Most sitcoms work as a co-protagonist model or a multi-protagonist model.
What we've got to do is kind of differentiate between a dual protagonist and an A-B storyline. Okay.
Okay. Fair.
My thought is that you might have an A-B storyline. Okay. So going back to the dual protagonist, you've got Andy and Ellis in Shawshank Redemption. That's a great example. You've also got Colin and Billy in a movie called The Departed, if you want to watch that and get some ideas. Also, Robert and Alfred in a movie called The Prestige. Those are dual protagonists.
The Prestige. Yes, that's a fun one. Yeah.
Those are really good dual protagonist storylines. But it's much more likely that you might have an A-B storyline or an ABC storyline. That's a great example of that was Seinfeld, where they had a cast of characters, and on any given episode, one of them would be a character with a want or need that faces an obstacle. And then another one of them would be another character with a want or need that faces a different obstacle. These would be different wants and needs, different goals, different things happening in different spaces that inevitably by the end of a Seinfeld episode would collide and either resolve each other or be affected by one another. It is much more likely that you've got an A-B storyline. And by the way, just about every Evil Inc. episode or every Evil Inc. chapter has an A-B storyline. Right now, I've got Miss Match wants to patch up her relationship with Captain Heroic going on. At the same time, Desdemona, who's a demon, is trying to pull off a big scam on the city. And those are going to kind of at some point intersect. Dual protagonists to me is really, really difficult to pull off because in my understanding, in the truest sense, you've got two people that are working towards often the same goal or a similar goal, but they're not cooperating. They're not in tandem with one another. They're kind of going at it separately, because once they start cooperating, it becomes either a buddy movie or a romance, and it becomes about the relationship more than anything else. So dual protagonists are really, really difficult in my mind to pull off. And it might be that you just have an A-B storyline that you're dealing with.
I'd actually love to hear your thoughts, because I hadn't thought about buddy comedies or cop movies.
Yeah.
But those very often are dual protagonists in a way. But how would you describe a buddy comedy of two people trying to, I don't know, solve a crime or solve a mystery or find a treasure or whatever it is? But in the meantime, the movie is essentially about, let's create a relationship of these two people while they do task A, right? What is that different in your mind than a dual protagonist?
Yeah, I would categorize that for me differently than a dual protagonist. Then it's really a story about the relationship. Every buddy movie, every like cop buddy movie or any other kind of buddy movie, and every romance, even though it's got two main characters that you can consider the protagonist, it's really about the relationship. It's about that love that's at the center of it. I don't know that I would necessarily consider that a dual protagonist.
Right. So because that makes me kind of question what my own thought about that Shawshank might be dual protagonist, because that is a relationship movie. Yeah. Again, going back to like that movie is a great example of like 16 different types of male love. And it's interesting how it's really about their friendship almost on a soul level, eventually flourishing. It's a relationship movie set in a shitty environment. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, but basically you can also have on a totally flip side, some aspects, not all, but some aspects of stories about Batman. You'll have the Joker and Batman, even though Joker is clearly the antagonist, it's written in such a way that one is basically the broken protagonist. They're both co-protagonists, both dual protagonists. Not all Batman stories, but some of the better ones are they could have been co-protagonists if the Joker had not gone down this path or had been broken in some way, that they're very similar personalities. Maybe that's a bad example, but I don't know. It's just a way of saying that you can have an antagonist who is in a way a failed mirror of the protagonist or a broken potential co-protagonist that didn't make it. But anyway, I think I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Well, let's pull this focus back a little bit, though, because I want to talk about this. Emily says, I've written the end of my first season, and I'm just now realizing that it's unclear who the main protagonist is. If that's the case, I want to pull back to that. If that's the case, then you really don't know what your story is about. And you might need to take a little bit of time to focus in on your story and and by the way, that's not at the end of your first draft. That's not a terrible indictment, right? But this is the perfect time for you to pull back and ask, hey, what story am I actually telling here? What's the actual story? It might be you're telling several stories at once. Again, that goes back to that AB or ABC storyline plot structure where there's lots of things going on at once, and maybe they're all colliding at the end. But your real question at that point to me is to ask yourself, what is this story about? And then once you focus in on that, then you can zone in on who your protagonist is. And then everything else that happens, they can have their own arcs and they can have their own pathways through the story. They can be very prominent characters, but they're not the protagonist. And then once you kind of figure that out, you can decide how to prioritize your storytelling and how to line that up so that they can so that in the worst case scenario, you don't do that. And then it becomes confusing to your reader what the heck is going on, right? You've got to kind of decide for yourself exactly what this is so that you can do a good job of telling that story to the reader. Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a helpful contrast, but the Eternals kind of suffered from not having a protagonist.
Yeah.
There was 48, 49 members of the Eternals for one thing. And none of them were given the sort of beginning, middle, end that a protagonist would have. Now, granted, everyone can have their own arc. As Brad said, you can have many characters in the same story telling parallel stories. They all have their own arc. But usually the protagonist has beginning, middle, end, and satisfying arc that you're identifying with, and or at the very least, if not identifying with, intellectually following all the way through. So you know that they're your touchstone for the story. And so when there's no protagonist, when there's no main character, and it's all just a disparate gathering of people like the Eternals, you don't have the emotional buy-in. I mean, one of the reasons why Avengers worked as a movie is you had the individualistic buy-in from each of those movies going in, so that when you brought them together, you had, in some respects, identified with your favorite, and you could follow them through. It's a bad example, but I don't know. I think really, to Brad's point, if you don't know what the story is, you do know what the story is. It's probably your B storyline or your secondary character grew a little bit more than you anticipated is probably what happened. When you started, you probably knew that you were telling the story of, I don't know, Jane and Susan, but it's just that Susan, or you were telling Jane's story, it's just that Susan's story got a little bit bigger as you went along. And that's okay, that happens. For a while in Star Wars, Han Solo has a lot of screen time, but then it fades back and it's mainly Luke's story again, that kind of thing. So it's okay that you have a character pop up for a bit. I think that might be what happened. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah. I just had a brainstorm, and this is impossible for me to do this accurately because I've never read Emily's comic. I don't know. I don't know anything past what she's told us. But one brainstorm I just had is if you've got these two really prominent storylines and you've got two strong characters, to the extent that you don't know yourself which one is the actual protagonist, that to me is the perfect setup for a Patreon exclusive. You decide which one is your main comic and you put that out in public. And then you take that second one that's also strong and compelling and you give them their own spin-off or side comic and you follow that person's story through a Patreon exclusive. you might have more, actually the potential to do something really kind of unique and satisfying there by breaking them off into their own two stories. And let's face it, we're all always looking for a good Patreon exclusive. That might be yours.
Yeah, and one thing, and this is only going to muddy the waters, but it's fun to mention it. One thing to remember in your writing, and this is separate from you as a creator, is that to write really effective characters, one thing to remember, both from the villain and the protagonist that you have, is that every character is the protagonist in their own mind.
Yeah.
Right? So you have, and what that does for you, just to remind yourself that it creates more fully realized characters on the page when they are the protagonist in their own mind. They have their own arc. They know their story, even if the reader doesn't. So they come in fully formed, fully fleshed when they're the protagonist in their mind. That doesn't necessarily help the conversation. In fact, that muddies the waters a little bit.
No, it's okay if they think they're the protagonist. The important thing is the author knows who's the real protagonist.
Right, and maybe that informs the discussion in the sense that Emily, that will help you see that even though in your mind you have fleshed them out because they are the protagonist in their own mind, they don't necessarily need to be the main protagonist or co-protagonist of the story. They can go back to being the somewhat support character to the one that you truly think is your protagonist. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dave, I think we've got time for one more question as we're closing out the show. This one comes in from Ben Todd, who says, my question is, what are the signs to look for to know if you're spreading yourself too thin? And how do you choose what to keep and what to discard in your art goals? I'm working towards making a living telling stories through comics and or storyboarding, but to climb that mountain while balancing a full-time job only gives me a small sliver of time to invest towards each. In order to have a chance from making a living from either of these things, do I need to put one down and attack another in full force? Does your table of many legs apply in this scenario? Thanks to both of you for the wisdom and laughs you bring me in the week. I still remember the time I had to stop inking because you made me laugh so hard I couldn't keep my hands steady. Well, I love hearing stuff like that. Thank you, Ben. So, David, how do you know you're spreading yourself too thin?
Oh boy, this is, I mean, one of the eternal questions that we get all the time, and it's both satisfying and honestly hard to answer, is these work-life balance questions and how to do time, because so much of it is personal, subjective, and self-directed. So maybe the only way I can speak to it is to say that over the course of my career in cartooning, there have been times when I went far too far in one direction, both in terms of either work balance or life balance, and had to rebalance it out again. So it is not something like once you get it figured out, it's figured out forever. And then, you never need to worry about work-life balance again. It's a constant adjustment, and it's something we all struggle with. And in terms of spreading ourselves too thin, that is absolutely something that can happen and has repeatedly happened for me. I don't know about Brad. I can't speak for him in my career, where I'm like, oh God, I am working way too much. I've got to, because I'm my own editor, I'm my own director, I'm my own producer, however you want to describe it. I'm my own boss. And also because I'm driven, I can very much overwork myself and pay both a physical and a mental and emotional price, and my relationships can pay a price. So, Brad, how about you? Have you had periods in your career where you way overworked yourself and you realized you spread yourself too thin?
Absolutely. So, I mean, really, as we said at the top of the show, we were going to talk a lot about setting priorities. This is really about setting priorities and what's a priority to you, and what has to take a back seat. And that's really tough when you're trying to do two things at once. Right. I'm going to circle around really quick. Does your many legs under the table apply to this? No, that is a business thing. That's once you get your business up. When we say many legs under the table, we're talking about having many income streams that you can use, that if one of them goes out, your business stays afloat. You're not at that point yet. Okay. You're trying to get to that point where you can worry about many legs. But this is not what we're talking about when we say many legs under the table. Right. You are at a place of prioritizing and deciding what you can do and what you can't do. I will tell you, like Dave just said, this is something we all deal with. And I'll bring it back to TikTok one more time. I was having great fun on TikTok. It was a lot of fun. If you noticed, I haven't posted anything in months. You know why? I was starting to fall behind on deadlines for my comic and for Patreon.
Work. Yeah.
And that's the stuff that's bringing money in. And I am a fierce Spartan when it comes to setting these priorities for myself. And as soon as I noticed I was struggling to keep it all, TikTok went. It got cut right out. No sooner than it took for me to realize it. It was fun. I enjoyed doing it. I still want to keep doing it because I like having that as an available pivot. But right now, I'm weeks ahead on my comic. I'm weeks ahead on my Patreon. I'm doing better than I've ever done before. And it's because I looked around and said, I'm wasting a lot of time on TikTok, right? So I had to set those priorities for myself. I've got to set priorities right now in my life to make sure that I'm taking good care of my body. I'm going to get on the treadmill because I got off of that for a little while. And it meant that I'm going to come into the studio maybe 2-3 hours later than I used to make, but I have to make time for my health, right? Because, you know, as Dave will tell you, I'm getting up there. You know, I'm getting a little gray in the beard.
No, but it's also just no matter what age, you can only dip from a well for so long before you need to refill it, you know, and that's
right. So I've had, in those same ways, I've had to set that. And I cannot tell you how to set your priorities because how dumb would that be? I don't know anything about your life. All I can tell you is that you've got to decide what's the most important thing for you. What's number one? And then how everything lines in behind that flows very naturally.
Well, I think I can speak for Brad, but I can absolutely speak for me in terms of sharing with you what I did when I had a corporate job during the day that paid very well, great benefits, really fun, creative environment when I was working at Mattel. And then I would go home nights and weekends and cartoon. And the way that I found that balance was I loved my job, very nice people, but I knew I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to become a cartoonist full time, which parallels to your question. I wanted to become a cartoonist full time. So what I did was at that point, this is between ages 25 and 35, I absolutely cut back on my own entertainment, right? I didn't sleep enough. And I worked nights and weekends to build up my comics career until I made about 70% of my Mattel income with cartooning. And then my wife said, now is the time, pull the trigger. And so I left the job. But what I had done for those 8 to 10 years of doing both was not play video games, not watch a lot of movies, not go out when friends were going out to a bar to hang out, you know, in its 20s and 30s. And by the way, I zero regret that choice, but that was the choice I had to make. Something had to give. And for me, it was entertainment. But of course, the counterbalance to that is having learned that pattern, it took me another 5 or 10 years before I had to tell myself, no, you can't actually be a creative person without giving yourself entertainment from time to time. You've got to play a video game or two. You got to go back to reading. You got to go back to watching TV. Like I'm being sincere, Brad. You know, life being a journey of learning moments, I had to learn that you need to take a break every now and again. To this day, my wife and I love what we do. We're not good vacationers because we go on vacation for 2 days and they're like, I got to get back to work. This was fun. I want to get back to work. I like what I do. But also we have to tell ourselves to book a vacation that's longer than 2 days now because we have to force ourselves to take a break, like lower the overall cortisol in our bodies and lower the stress levels. And so it's still a learning process for me now is that I've got to teach myself. And then there was a whole nother wrinkle when kids came along because that throws your schedules off. It throws your ability to self schedule and to self plan because there's these little bodies that I need to be fed right now. I need to go to the park right now. I need to poop right now, whatever it is. And you've got to take care of them.
That's right.
Hey, Mr. Kelly! And so that throws you off for a couple of years until you get that managed again. And then, so anyway, but what I'm saying is there's no one fix for life, but you have to find out that at any given one time, there's usually one thing that has to be removed. And when I was in your stage of day job and wanting to be a cartoonist, the way I did it was probably an hour less of sleep every night than I should have had, and definitely less entertainment than other peers and friends at my level at that point in their life.
Yeah. And it's listen, there's no easy answer to this one. I mean, that's the hard truth, is that there is no easy answer to this. We've all been where you're at. Some of us are struggling right there along with you. And there's only so many hours in the day. Your only real answer is to be nice to yourself about all of this, and to realize that I'm going to leave you with this as we're wrapping this topic up. The one thing that I really wish I would have done maybe a little bit differently is, man, I was hell-bent on getting the heck out of newspapers. And part of that was I could see the foundation crumbling around me. And in a way, I kind of got out at just the right time. I think if I'd have stayed another couple of years, it would have been bad. But I put so much pressure on myself to get out. It had to get done right now. And every year that it didn't happen, I was making myself more miserable. Give yourself some time. Give yourself lots of time. This goal of yours probably isn't going to happen this year. All right? That's okay. It's good to have long-term goals. This is a good thing. Take your time. You've got time. You've got more time than you think. It doesn't have to be done right now. I know you want it so bad you can taste it. But give yourself the kindness of giving yourself more time to hit that goal, because it's going to take a long time, just being realistically. And the last thing you need is feelings of self-worth tied up into that, feelings of failure tied up into that.
True.
Making it even harder than it already is. So be nice to yourself and give yourself a little more time.
And also, a better way to ask it sometimes is, what will I regret the most? Will I regret spending time with family? No, you won't.
No, never.
Will I regret working on cartooning? No, you won't. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there's other ways you can look at this that are sort of, you can make pro-con lists of how you divide up your time. You can look at which one you will regret in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time of either having done or not done. Do I regret not having played Halo 2 in 2000 whatever versus cartooning? Absolutely not. I'm so glad that younger me chose to cartoon rather than play Halo 2, whatever the hell it was at the time. So look at what activity. This also goes true with that, and it is parallel to that social media question. Will you regret spending time on social media right now versus cartooning? Absolutely you will.
Yes.
Absolutely you will. So try to cut out the bullshit, and we all have it, the bullshit that fills your day, with the stuff that matters, which is family, work, and working on your dream career.
And absolutely, as you are lining up your list of regrets, hopefully one thing that you won't regret is spending another hour listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been the king of transitions, my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Cullett, the co-director of Stripped, the comics documentary, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say it like preschoolers, patreon.com/ComicLab.
And now it's time for your affirmation with Susan McTaggart.
Hello, friends. Susan McTaggart here, author of the new book, Guard Your Heart, because no one else will guard it for you. And I remind you today with my big statement of love and encouragement, saying, don't forget, friends, that absence makes the heart grow fonder, but absence makes the heart grow 5 times larger and gives you a heart attack.
Are you listening, Glenn? Are you listening, my ex-husband, Glenn? I hope
Glenn, you son of a bitch, go ahead and pour yourself another cup of absinthe.